Continuing with Newsmaker now with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Gary, thank you for calling in.
Well, thanks for having me on the program here. I heard Tracy Matrano say something at the end of the program about thanking you for calling in order to wake her up in the morning. Well, I wish I could say the same thing because I've been up since about 3 o'clock this morning.
Really?
Well, I have insomnia. It's called terminal insomnia, not something that most of our listeners want to hear much about, I'm afraid.
Sure thing. Yeah, that's a rough one. Talking with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. I wanted to start out with the COVID-19 situation. Well,
it's getting, I think, worse rather than better. People have heard me on this program being quite critical of the administration and the way in which the administration has responded to COVID-19. And I think that we're going to find that much of that criticism, and not only from Gary Ostrower, is very much on the mark. I thought it was kind of interesting that the president on Friday night, long after the reporters had gone to bed, long after anyone was really paying attention, announced something which is kind of under the radar precisely because of the way in which it was that it was revealed. He fired a woman by the name of Christy Grimm. Christy Grimm was the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services. She had been originally appointed to the office, not as the Inspector General, but as to one of the people in the office by President Bush way back in 1999, and then she continued to serve during the Obama years, and then continued to serve she served throughout the entirety of the Bush administration, then with Obama, and then she was appointed by President Trump on, I think it was January of this year, a few months ago, as the head of the office, as the Inspector General. Well, she said about a month ago, less than a month ago, that the U.S. response to COVID had not been very systematic, that we didn't have enough testing equipment. We didn't have enough, the gowns and the other PPF, they call it, or PPE. In other words, she, kind of took issue with some of the rosy predictions and some of the bragging of the White House about our response being the best in the entire world. That got her into trouble, and she was fired, and now we have someone who is certainly going to be more of a company man, meaning, in other words, someone who is not going to give us the truth. So I find that I find that very, very disturbing. I find equally disturbing, which I learned, I think it was on the very same day, Saturday, that Anthony Fauci, that Dr. Fauci, who is really one of the few voices that we can trust in respect to this whole business, he and Dr. Birx, he is now being prevented from testifying before Congress. The White House has prevented him, has basically muzzled him from speaking to Congress. That's not where we should be right now. The more information, the more transparent we are, the better. And I think that we see other, elements of this as well. We just Congress recently passed almost a $3 trillion stimulus program. It included the legislation, information. It included a clause, a requirement for congressional oversight of this. Well, it wouldn't be congressional per se, but to have an individual who's going to be able to oversee all of this spending, to make sure, in other words, that the money is going to be, issued to those to whom it should be issued. Well, the president then signed something called a signing order, which is legal, but in which he said he's simply not going to comply with this part of the legislation. So right now, we do not know where much of that money is going. It's a way of putting blindfolds on the American public. It's a way of stonewalling the American public. And I think that it's much more reminiscent of the way in which things are done in places like Hungary and Venezuela than they should be done in the United States of America.
Dr. Ostrower, with the president's announcement that he was going to be doing less press conferences, and what do you make of that?
Well, I think his press conferences have been, number one, he's overexposed himself. Secondly, he said a lot of things in those press conferences that are simply imbecilic. When he tells us, for instance, that we should somehow put light, and get light into our digestive system, or when he tells us that we should be injecting ourselves with Lysol, with disinfectant, it simply reduces the willingness, even of his own supporters, to take him seriously. And I think finally, his own advisors have gotten through to him that the more he talks, the more he's going to be putting his foot into a series of different buckets. And so he's going, we will hear, thankfully, I think, a little bit less of him. But one of the things we have heard from him, and we've heard this consistently in February, we've heard it in March, we've certainly heard it in April, is that no country is doing more than the United States. I'm going to use his words here. He says, what we are doing is an incredible job on testing. There's nobody close, and other nations have admitted this. Brian, there is no other nation that has admitted this. He doesn't tell the truth, okay? He's really, kind of puffing up his own administration. Everything he says in many ways is geared for the election in 2020. We haven't done a particularly good job in testing. We don't come close to what countries such as South Korea have done, and therefore we're behind the eight ball. And so what we're seeing now is a presidential campaign to open up the country at the very, very time when we're seeing the number of cases increase rather than decrease. Just yesterday, the CDC announced that a new model that they are taking very seriously has suggested that we are going to have as many as 3,000 deaths from COVID-19 every single day as of about June 1st or so. We're going to see the number of deaths estimated from, the president was saying initially 15, then 0, then 2,000, then eventually 60,000. But the CDC is now claiming that we may have as many as 135,000 deaths from COVID-19. And that is a national tragedy. I mean, I don't know how else to convey, the significance of what's happening here. 135,000, and that's just an estimate. It may be more than that for all we know. And so, to take seriously what's coming out of the White House, I think we're putting blinders on ourselves. I think that we have to be realistic, and we have to understand that when we open up the country, which is what the president wants us to do, and what many people listening to this program wants us to do, we're going to have more people contracting COVID-19. We're going to have more people dying from COVID-19. And, for those of us who happen to be in an age where we're in the most vulnerable age group, that's not a very, very comforting idea.
Dr. Ostrower, the conservative talking heads have been saying lately that they think Joe Biden could be dropped. They're wondering if the New York Times wants that to happen because the Times put out an article recently saying that they think that that might happen, almost urging it to happen, according to some of the conservative talk show hosts. The reasons the conservatives are wondering this is because of the Tara Reade allegations against Biden, and also Biden's frequent stumbling, I guess you could say, on the campaign trail. What do you make of all that?
I wouldn't take the conservative press very seriously about that. It's possible that he will be dropped. I think that I read the op-ed. It was an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times. But, if for those people who read the New York Times, that they have op-eds from very conservative people, including Trump supporters, from very liberal people, from people who supported Bernie Sanders, in this case from an individual who was speculating and not advocating, I might add, that Biden could be dropped. Her argument was that he's not running a very effective campaign. He hasn't really been out there. He's been very, very quiet, and that may be because Biden's advisors are telling him that, look, right now the president is not doing well. The president is declining in popularity. Don't interfere with that. Just let the president, tie his own noose, so to speak. But it may also have, and I suspect it probably does have something to do with the Tara Reade allegations. Now, it's at this stage when Biden has, if I'm not mistaken, something like 75% of the delegates at the Democratic National Convention already tied up, already committed. It would be very, very difficult to change horses in this kind of a midstream. But suppose Biden gets COVID-19. Suppose that Tara Reade allegation does turn out to be more serious than it appears to be right now. I mean, there are a lot of contradictions in what she is saying, and I think that, for most of us, the jury is out. But if that happens, then sure, it's possible that that there would be a change. But if there is going to be a change, you can bet your life that the Bernie Sanders supporters are going to argue that his guy was number 2 and he should become the candidate. You're going to have a lot of people arguing that it should be a female candidate like Elizabeth Warren. You're going to have others arguing that, look, you have to have a centrist in order to attract independents, and therefore it has to be someone like, maybe Amy Klobuchar, or perhaps Cuomo, who certainly has become a lot more visible over the past few weeks. So I wouldn't dismiss it. But I also think we got to keep our eyes on other things. One of the interesting stories over the last few days is that the COVID-19, which everyone agrees began in China. Okay, there's no dispute about that whatsoever. And the assumption has been until now that it began in what they call one of these wet markets, where they have bats and where they have dogs and so forth that they're selling. These places are, they would never pass a U.S. health inspection, let's put it that way. And that is, I might add, where SARS began way back in 2003 and where we believe H1N1 began back in around 2011 or 2012. But the Trump administration has been promoting the idea that it came out of a Chinese lab. Now, no one is saying, I don't even think Trump is saying that it was deliberately, loose out, that it was some kind of an accident. But the fact is that there is absolutely no evidence, to my knowledge, that it came out of a lab. Even Anthony Fauci said, as recently as yesterday, that there is no evidence, that in all likelihood it came out of a natural environment, in other words, those wet markets, and it was human-to-human transmission. So why are we hearing so much of this from the Trump administration? And I think the answer is, and I'm speculating here, but I'm guessing the answer is as a way of distracting from the president's own failings, a way of distracting from some of the things he said, like his, injecting ourselves with Lysol. And so, are we going to hear much more about this? The answer is, I suspect that we will. Will we hear more about it from Joe Biden? That's a big question mark on that one, because I do think that Biden's campaign has been very, very, it's hardly been a campaign up to this point. It's really been, I think, quite ineffective.
Going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Stay with us.
With some recent revisions, our certificate sale is still going on. Save up to 50% off your favorite restaurant or local business. Pay online and we'll ship the certificates to you at no extra charge. Go to WLEA.net and click on Certificate Auction Sales. Buy the certificates you want and request that they be shipped. Let us help you save money. And thanks for listening to AM 1480 WLEA.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carolyn, who says Cinco de Mayo is not as warm as he expects it usually to be.
That's right, Brian. Your margaritas will be able to stay cold out there this morning. We've got some temperatures in the 20s this morning starting out, so you don't have to worry about the melting. And it is not going to be very warm, Brian. This time of year, we're supposed to be up into the 60s during the afternoon. We're going to run about 10 degrees below normal today and tomorrow, and on into Thursday. And then the really cold stuff arrives Friday, Saturday. Brian, what would you say if I told you it may snow here on Saturday?
Wow.
Yeah, it is a possibility right now, especially across some of the higher hilltops. We'll be keeping a close watch on that. Some unusually cold weather headed our way. Why? Well, we continue to have this deep dip in the jet stream that's actually producing cross-polar flow. It's bringing air down from the Arctic right into the eastern United States, and that is progressively going to turn us colder this week. If it was January, we'd be talking about sub-zero readings this morning, but we're talking about freezing temperatures. Lots of sun today. We're 50 to 55. Sun came up this morning at 5:58. It sets tonight at 8:16. We'll have increasingly cloudy weather tonight. Another frost possible, 30 to 35. Clouds, chance of a couple of showers for tomorrow, 50 to 55. Partly cloudy tomorrow night. There could be some frost, 30 to 35. Partial sun at times Thursday, breezy, chance of a couple of showers, 55 to 60. And it does not look very nice at all for Friday or Saturday.
Back with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, there's been a lot of criticisms of the Chinese government, saying that China should have told us sooner. China has not been open enough. What do you make of all that?
I say that 99% of that criticism is true. Certainly the Chinese have not been very open. They tried to muzzle the one person who was willing to blow the whistle on this whole thing back in January. That was that young doctor, I think only 34 years old, who eventually died of COVID-19 in Wuhan. The Chinese have, in many ways, I think, tried to sanitize their own role in this. The Chinese have a lot of responsibility. Maybe this is what governments do, you know. I mean, we see it here in the United States, you know, as Trump is trying to, how shall I say, do a PR job on his own response. But the Chinese, I think, have been masters of this. But I also want to call your attention to an issue that I think has, you know, something of a local connection here. The Chinese arrested an individual, a man by the name of Ding Jiaxi. I hope I'm pronouncing his first name is Jiaxi, and his last name is surname would be Ding. He was a lawyer. He's a Chinese human rights activist. He happens to be married to someone who's working right here at Alstom. Her name is Sophie Liu. He was arrested about 2 months ago or so, maybe more than 2 months ago. No one knows where he is. Sophie Liu, his wife, cannot get any information about him whatsoever. We have no reason to think at this point that he has not probably been tortured by the Chinese to get information, not only about his own activity, but about the activity of others with whom he has worked. You know, he simply kind of disappeared, and it's a very, very sad case, and it's the kind of thing that happens in a totalitarian society. And while China may not be totalitarian today the way it was under Mao Zedong some years ago, nevertheless, it is a very, very highly controlled society, and if you criticize China from the inside, then watch out. And as I say, he's been now incarcerated for months and months, and we do not know where. We do not know whether he has been subject to torture. We don't know anything that we should be knowing, and none of this information has been, you know, conveyed to his wife. I might also add that Amnesty International, which is an international organization that takes these kinds of things very, very seriously, that Amnesty International has taken up his cause. And the one thing I think we can all agree on is that more and more publicity for this kind of a case is sunlight. More and more publicity is likely, maybe the only thing that's going to help to free him, or at least to provide information to Sophie Liu, his wife, about his fate. The Chinese, in other words, have been, when it comes to information, I would give them an F, maybe an F plus on some cases. The other thing I would want to say about China, though, and this is why it's a dilemma for the United States and even for the Trump administration. We get an awful lot of goods, obviously, from China. The Chinese are making right now 50% of all the face masks, including the N95 mask, the most protective of the face masks. We need that equipment. Much of the other PPE, the equipment that we have to protect healthcare workers, comes from China. And so the degree to which the Chinese have I don't want to call it controlling interest in all of this, but, you know, we don't want to alienate them to the point where we're not going to get this equipment. And it's not only that kind of equipment that we're getting from China. You walk into Walmart and you're going to find a huge amount of material that has been produced in China. And so for economic reasons, especially when we're vulnerable economically as we are these days, I think it's all the more important that we kind of tread a line with China that exposes what has to be exposed, such as the fate of this young man, and by the same token does not create something which takes us from a serious recession into a long-term depression. It's a very, very real dilemma, and I sympathize with the people who are in authority at this point.
Dr. Gary Ostrower, down to the last couple of minutes. On this day in history, one of the points, I know it's Cinco de Mayo, but this is the top thing on the History Channel's page. Allies end occupation of West Germany. France, the UK, and the U.S. Pull out of West Germany this day in history, 1955.
Well, that was an important moment, in the sense that it really kind of turns West Germany from having been a former enemy into a real ally. West Germany is going to be invited into NATO. West Germany is going to be invited into the United Nations. It's a real turning point, and I guess we would call it the history of the Cold War. The history of the Cold War by 1955 is a history of a relationship between the U.S. And the Soviet Union that had really hardened into two. They had become absolutely adversaries, and there did not seem to be a thaw in all of that, except in one sense. Stalin, the Russian dictator, died in 1953. That's one of the things that allowed the Korean War to end, that allowed President Eisenhower to negotiate with the North Koreans in a way that finally ended the Korean War. By 1955, there was a little bit of uncertainty as to which way things were going to go in the Soviet Union. But unfortunately, the idea of maintaining a very, very hostile relationship toward the United States continued, and it would continue until the middle of the 1980s, until the Reagan administration, when Mikhail Gorbachev became the premier of the Soviet Union. And only then did things really begin to thaw, and then eventually, of course, the Berlin Wall came down in 1989.
With that, we have to leave it. Dr. Ostrower, as always, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Let's hope that we have some real spring.